What's going on, everybody? J-How here with a Diablo 3 Demon Hunter build guide that's sure to have you having a lot of fun going into Season 9 and patch 2.4.3. It's kind of a throwback to the old Sentry build, but a little bit of a twist with some changes to the gear. We're going to go over the skills, the gear, and everything you need to know to make this work. So first things first, let's take a look at the skills. So when we look at the skills right away, you're going to see Evasive Fire with Hardened. Now, a couple people will go with a couple of different options here, but quite simply, if an enemy is in front of you at close range, your armor is increased by 25% for 3 seconds. Because you're going to be moving through a lot of areas, this is a huge deal. To be able to get through greater rifts at high levels, this is basically a necessity. You don't necessarily have to worry about building up your hatred because you're going to be able to have the abilities and the gear to make sure that that happens, so it's not that big of a deal. But the main damage dealer of the build is going to be cluster arrow, cluster bombs. Now this used to be quite a bit different. This is going to be the first iteration that we're going to see for cluster bombs. You're going to pair this up with some of the gear that you'll have later that really emphasize the strength of the grenades in this patch. So right there is going to be your #1 attack. Now, when we look at other abilities, we're going to look at Vault with Tumble. Tumble is going to be there because you're going to be able to reduce the discipline cost by 50% if you use it again within 6 seconds. And that's a pretty big deal because you're going to be vaulting through areas, and depending on some of the gear you go with, if you go with Elusive Ring, which we'll get into in the gear section, you're going to use damage mitigation. And that's kind of the big thing when we talk about being able to use Vault over and over. Now, the Sentry, because this is a Sentry build, we're going to be going with Polar Station. You're going to get that extra slow, which is going to increase the damage with your passives and with your legendary gems. So all around, a great Sentry to be able to place down, to be able to get the slow, to get the chill, and then to be able to amplify damage using that is going to be key. Next up, Vengeance with Seethe. Now, the big part about this is you get 10 hatred per second. That's a really big deal to be able to get that hatred. You're going to be firing off so many cluster arrows with the cluster bombs that you need to be able to keep your hatred up, and you don't necessarily want to have to auto attack unnecessarily, so this will help you. It's going to do a bit of damage, and for the most part this is going to be on almost 100% cooldown, or on uptime, so you'll be able to do that through gear, through your Kanai's Cube, and through just a little bit of extra cooldown reduction will get you quite a ways. Around 36% will get you there. As far as the companion goes, it actually doesn't matter which one you pick, just simply due to the fact that you're going to be running the set bonus, which will give you all of them. Now, when it comes to the passives, Steady Aim is one that can be a little bit debated. You could go Leech here, but this does tend to add a bit more damage at the top range. If you're looking to stay alive a little bit more, Leech is not a bad way, but to be able to get this damage is pretty big. One of the most necessary passives is Custom Engineering. This will increase the duration of your sentries, and furthermore, it increases the maximum number and charges of sentries to 3. You're going to couple this with the Bombardier's Rucksack, which means that you can put down more sentries, which coupled with your set bonus means one thing: more damage. Now, when we talk about cluster bombs, they drop grenades, and one of the key things that when we get to the gear section is the increase in damage. Now, one of the things you can do right away is increase the damage of grenades by 10% and the explosion size of grenades by 20%. So being able to maximize the amount of damage that you're getting out of those grenades plus your gear, pretty key. And lastly, Call the Weak increases the damage against slowed or chilled enemies. Now, we already talked about Sentry with Polar Station to be able to get the slows, so being able to place those in key areas will give you the proc on this, plus your Bane of the Trapped. So there's some good synergy between your skills and your gear and passives that can go a long ways. All right, so when we look at the gear, the Manticore is key to the build. It reduces the hatred cost of Cluster Arrow by up to 50% depending on how it rolls. This is pretty critical and able to do a lot of damage and to not run out of hatred. This is kind of a big deal. You're going to suffer a lot without it. So having this here is great. Having a little bit of cooldown reduction on this goes a long way, as well as including the ever necessary socket, but having a little bit of cooldown reduction on your gear, including your weapon, is going to help out a lot, mainly for that Vengeance, to be able to regen that hatred. That's kind of key. When we look at other items, the Bombardier's Rucksack, this is huge for no other reason other than you get 2 additional sentries. That's why you need it. To be able to put more sentries down, you have those extra charges. You now are able to place several sentries around and to be able to do a lot of damage. We'll get to the passives of your set bonus here in a second. Area damage, if you can get it on here, pretty key. Obviously, this also increases your sentry damage. So things like area damage, crit chance attack speed, pretty key on this item. The other item, Wraps of Clarity. This is pretty big because your hatred generators are going to reduce damage taken. And you are a demon hunter, so you're susceptible to a lot and taking a lot of damage. Being able to use your hatred generator at least every 5 seconds to keep this up is key, especially in high greater rifts. If you're not mitigating the damage by taking advantage of the Wraps of Clarity, you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, Zoe's secret on the belt. You take less damage, up to 9%, for every companion you have active. Because one of the passives on the Marauders is to have all the companions available, this is another damage mitigating bonus to your set. So it's pretty huge to make sure and have the belt as well as the bracers to be able to mitigate a lot of damage and to be able to stay in fights and do damage elsewhere. Now, when we talk about the jewelry, Convention of Elements is pretty much the go-to just because you're going to get that amplified damage. You're going to be doing fire damage, so whenever it goes over that, it's going to be key there. You're going to get a lot of good value out of that. Just a really strong damage buff. Then we look at the other side. The Compass Rose pairs really well with the Traveler's Pledge. While standing still, damage dealt is increased by up to 100%. This is pretty big because you're going to be able to stand back, fire at range with all of your turrets, with all of your pets, tanking a lot of incoming damage and a lot of incoming minions. So being able to use this standing still is key. You don't want to stand there and eat a lot of damage, but it does help to do quite a bit at a lot of key times. Making sure to use Vault is the #1 thing, and to be able to get to and from different places, mitigating damage, and to be able to do more damage doing so. While moving, damage taken going to be reduced, so that should help. On your amulet and your bracers, you want to make sure and get fire damage if at all possible. And then of course the socket is very important in the amulet as well. Now, when we talk about the Marauder set bonus, the 2 set bonus, Companion calls all companions to your side. That's key. I've already talked about that. You get a lot of value out of that with the belt and other things going on. The 4-piece bonus, Sentries deal 400% increased damage and will cast the cluster arrow when you do. So they're going to do more damage and they're going to throw out the cluster arrow. Next up, the 6-piece bonus, your cluster arrow will deal 1200% increased damage for every active sentry. Your Vengeance will too, but the main thing here is the cluster arrow. And the whole thing about this is going with Bombardier's Rucksack and everything that you have available to you, you're going to be able to put more sentries down, and using the custom engineering passive, you'll have more charges, things like that. So being able to put more sentries down is kind of the name of the game, because that 6-piece bonus will increase your damage immensely. Now, the big thing is going to be your cube. Dawn, reduce the cooldown of Vengeance by 65%. Now, we already talked about Vengeance being on a 90% cooldown. Having a little bit of cooldown reduction paired with this in your cube means you should have Vengeance on a 100% uptime or pretty close to it if you're not able to roll specific things early on. So having this is key to making sure that you're getting that hatred back and being able to dish out more damage and stay active. Now, the big change in Season 8 and patch 2.4.3 is the Hellcat Waistguard. Now, we've talked about cluster bombs and everything else that you're using and why you're using it in Grenadier. This is the reason why. Grenades have a chance to bounce 5 times, dealing an additional 50% damage on each bounce. This bonus is increased to 800% on the final bounce. Now, cluster bombs are going to be dropping the grenades, and Grenadier is going to help to make sure that they do more damage. This is why this build is so powerful. It's what makes Marauders viable, and it changes up a lot of the playstyles that you've been used to at the top of the leaderboard by bringing the Sentry build back into play with a little bit of a twist. I like this a lot. In your jewelry slot, Elusive Ring. I talked about the usefulness of Vault and Tumble. After casting Shadow Power Smokescreen or Vault, that's the key, takes 60% reduced damage for 8 seconds. Now, Vault, you can use it again on a 50% discipline, less discipline, every 6 seconds. So being able to use Vault and to make use of this as a passive, you now have damage mitigation through your Vault, through your bracers, and through your belt, which is so crucial to high-level greater rifts for the Demon Hunter and basically the Demon Hunter in general. Looking at the legendary gems, there's definitely going to be 2 that you're going to want to make sure and have. And one of those is Bane of the Trapped. And I alluded to that a little bit earlier in the video when I talked about the Polar Sentry. This is going to be able to amplify a lot of that damage, and it's just a really great one. The other one, Esoteric Alteration. Being able to mitigate a lot of damage, especially at very high greater rifts, is something that the Demon Hunter really needs on their side. So this is a great pickup. There are some alternatives you can go with, but I think at high greater rifts, this is definitely what you want to go with. Now, when it comes to the third one, there's actually 2 lines of thinking. One of those being Zai's Stone of Vengeance, which increases your damage, but based on range. So every 10 yards between you and the enemy hit increases your damage, and of course this goes up as you rank it up, plus you have a chance for the stun, which is also pretty good. That's one line of thinking. The other one is the Bane of the Stricken, which means the more that you hit an enemy, the more damage it does, and you can trade off on either one that you like. If you're on key with your positioning, Zai's Stone can really hit that top tier, but at the same time, Bane of the Stricken is no slouch. So 2 out of the 3 are pretty set, and then the third one is basically going to be a preference and playstyle thing. So that's going to do it for this Diablo 3 Demon Hunter guide in patch 2.4.3 and season 9. A little bit of a change on the old Sentry build. I personally like it. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Obviously, it's a bit of a throwback. It's been around at different times, but I kind of like this change in pace. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, be sure and subscribe for more Diablo content coming in the future, as well as checking out some of the other videos that are available as well. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Until next time, happy hunting. See you again.